This snapshot deals with down under, or as we say, Australia. The area of Australia, as we'll see when we talk about size, is very significant. It's a large piece of ground. It is located, as you can see on the map, south of Indonesia. In fact, Indonesia is one of its close neighbors that they undertake trade with. Papua New Guinea is also to the north of Australia, and the Coral Sea is to the east, and southeast is Tasman Sea. Tasmania is to the south, with that island being of significant play with regard to Australia, and we'll say a little more on that later. The Indian Ocean is also to the south, and a bit to the, well, it's to the south and then to the west, and then on up to the northwest of Australia. The geographic area of Australia, as many would know if they visited, is such that it is difficult to utilize most of Australia. Therefore, we see a good deal of the development in Australia being on the coastal areas. That's on the east coast, the west coast, also to the north and south to a degree, but mainly the east coast of Australia. The area is a very large country, as mentioned, and some people will, when comparing countries, and we think of larger countries as Russia being the largest with about 17,500 square kilometers to about 8,500 square kilometers for countries such as China and U.S. and so on, at least in those ranges. Here we see a very large country, and we don't usually think of it when we're talking about large countries because it's, quote, separate. And Australia being down under is about 7,741,000 square kilometers. And let me correct myself. I think I said before thousands also, and I meant million. 8.5 million with the United States, 8.5 million with Canada, and about 17,500,000 with Russia. So I correct myself. I was thinking in thousands instead of millions. The coastline is large. It's about 25,700 kilometers. So Australia, again, is a very big country and lots of coastal area, but not much activity in the interior portions of Australia because the terrain is so difficult. There are some territorial disputes, by the way. You might not think so. Say Australia is out there alone, but to the Antarctic area there are some territorial ones to the south of Australia with the Antarctic. About 54% of Australia is permanent, as they say, pastures, 19% forests and woodlands, and about 7% is arable land. The point being that there's a good deal of Australia, again, that is not utilized. It has wonderful natural resources. One has to capture those resources, though. Coal, iron ore, copper, lead, zinc, diamonds, natural gas, petroleum, but you have to go get it, and that's not easy in the terrain of Australia. There's varied climate because of the huge country, and it would be the same as saying what's the climate in the United States. It varies whether you're the north or the south, and that's the same thing true in Australia. The climate, as mentioned, varies, but we can guess what it might be depending on whether you're in the north or the south portions of Australia. Of course, it's the flip side because it's down under, so it's flipped in compared to, say, the United States and the seasons, where it's summer in the United States in, for example, June, July, August, September kind of range. It would be just the opposite in Australia, and then the summer in Australia, where you would be picking cherries and enjoying yourself, might be in December, January, February. Environmental problems are soil erosion, damage to natural habitats of the animals, fresh water issues, those kind of things. The history of Australia is that it's been involved with various countries. The Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, English explorers came, and there have been various claims to Australia. In January of 1788 was the first fleet under Captain Arthur Phillip landed at Sydney, And then since then we've had other various claims. You'll see on the screen to Australia and colonies that have been in Australia, and you see the 6 colonies that are noted on the screen: New South Wales, Tasmania, Western Australia, South Australia, Victoria, and Queensland. And then in October of 1942 there was a statute passed, Adoption Act, established Australia's complete autonomy in internal and external affairs. So that's back in 1942. In 1986, Australia Act eliminated the last vestiges of British legal authority, so there's still a strong tie, but the legal authority varied. Also, of course, we have a history of Australia being a penal colony where prisoners were often sent from Great Britain. As far as the population, this is one of the most contrasting and inconsistent positions when size and population. Australia is huge, again about 7,700,000 plus square kilometers, yet it has a population of somewhere around 22 million people. So it's not a very populated country relative to the ground, but keep in mind, again, because of the terrain, most of the population is located on coastal lines, so on the east coast, west coast, and a little bit to the north and south. About 2/3 of the population, which is similar to Europe, are between ages of 15 and 64 years of age. The population growth rate is a little better here than we mentioned it in Europe, because the population here is at least replacing somewhat, whereas it has been down in some of the European countries. Life expectancy is similar to that in the United States. It's about 80 years, 79, 80 years for the male, and about 84 years for the female. Very educated population. Almost everybody can read and write at age 15 or greater. The dominant religions are the Catholic religion with about 25-26%. Then we have a mix of others. Anglican 18-19%, Christian about 20%, a mix of others, Buddhists, Muslims, and so forth. And then, of course, there are some that are not specified or not religious in the sense of maybe atheists or others. But it's not a dominant position of Catholics, for example, if we compare it to Ireland or a lot of other places in Europe, because we have 3 major groups, as mentioned, that are stronger religious positions. Ethnicity, however, is clearly white, dominant position, 92%. There are more Asians coming in, about 7%. And the Aborigine that have been there for many, many years, it represents only a small populace of about 1%. The language is clearly and dominantly, because of the English background, English. However, there are other languages spoken as well, but English is the clear dominant language in Australia. The government is a federal parliamentary democracy. Capital is Canberra. A lot of people confuse that, think, well, it's really got to be Sydney or some other place, but it isn't. Independence was 1901. It has a national holiday, which is January 26, known as the Australia Day, and it has 6 states and 2 territories. Legal system, again, is based on the English common law, as mentioned. England dominated for Australia until it gained its independence. Therefore, the English common law system was the dominant system that was put into place. It has a number of major parties: Liberal Party, National Party, and Australian Labour Party, and has 3 branches of government, the typical 3: executive, legislative, and judicial. The chief of state is the British monarch, that's the Queen, Queen Elizabeth, but the real activity for the government is headed and directed by the Prime Minister. It's a bicameral federal parliament with a Senate and House of Representatives, and it has a high court with other lower courts feeding into the high court. The economy is reasonable, facing a reasonable growth of about 2–2.5%. It's not great, but it's a lot better than what's happening in Europe, where we've seen a declining economy. The per capita earnings are fairly good at $38,200. The growth rate, however, is in question because of, again, what's happening in the world's economies in general. But the Australian economy, again, was growing at 2 to 2.5%, so it's at least a reasonable growth rate. It is active to export its coal, gold, meat, wool, iron ore, and a number of other natural resources. Inflation is about 4%, so it's a little high, 4 to 4.5%. Employment is fairly low at about 4%. The transportation and communication system has good transportation through the major cities. Remember, those are on the coastal areas. Not great transportation and communication in the interior portions of Australia. It does have a number of waterways, especially on the east coast, as mentioned, because of the major cities located on the east coast. And it does have ties and ports on some on the west coast, but those are more limited than those on the east coast. Hardline phones are approximately one for every 2 of the population, meaning about 9 million to 10 million hard phone lines with a population of about 22 million. And interestingly enough, the cell phones are about 1 per member of the population, about 22 million. Radio stations and TV stations are present for additional communications, and they are strong users of the internet, with over 15 million users out of about 22 million total population. On the real estate side, they do use real estate agents. They're paid by commission, but they do a lot of auction process, and not because of a desperate position that we might associate with auctions when real property has trouble and people put them up for sale through an auction vehicle. Auctions are a common used method of disposing of property, where signs are put up, people can inspect the property, and then there's an auction for the sale of the same. They could have that auction with some reserve that requires a minimum price, but auctions are used again to dispose of property on a regular basis, and not necessarily again when the market is down. There are some restrictions on investing in Australia, and there is the means of gaining title or seeing title to land registration. Remember, Australia is tied heavily to Great Britain. Great Britain developed the Torrens land registration system with Australia because of Sir Robert Torrens, the registration system. So it is very common with land in Australia to be registered under a registration system. The Torrens registration system is similar to a car registration, where there is a government office and there is a title paper that shows ownership position. There are additional legal descriptions that are tied to the Torrens registration. That is, a meets and bounds, which is then utilized to tie to the registration of the title. Taxation certainly is present in Australia, whether that be property taxes, income taxes, or other taxes. On the cultural side, Australia is very similar to the United States and Great Britain. Dress is much more casual, however. Part of that deals with the climate, which requires, or at least dictates in many instances, a more relaxed dress as opposed to coats and ties. It doesn't mean coats and ties aren't worn, but it's more relaxed. Eating is also more informal, continental style,